Just take a few deep, slow breaths. And get the mind grounded, centered in the body. Okay, friends, now is the time for what is called the Dhamma talk. So, what is the Dhamma? So, usually when we use the term Dhamma or Dharma in the Sanskrit pronunciation, refers to the teachings of the Buddha. Then what are the teachings of the Buddha? The Dhamma. And you're kind of in a catch-22. And the word Dhamma is a very large word. It basically means everything. Everything in existence, which includes the conditioned world of mind and matter and objects and thoughts, as well as the unconditioned, or the state of the universe before the conditioned world arose. But to keep it simple, especially in terms of the teaching of the Buddha, it refers to the nature of existence in terms of, especially in terms of what causes suffering and what causes happiness. The Buddha was mainly interested in the nature of our mind, because through the Buddha's deep enlightenment experience, he discovered that essentially even the external world is a creation of the mind to a large extent. And he wasn't so much interested in how this external world, when and where and how and why it was created, either by some external God or some supernatural power, or he wasn't so interested in that, but he was interested in the mind and how the mind creates its projection of the world, and how essentially our view of the world is created from within the mind with its thought processes and ego consciousness. And to keep it simple, the Dhamma basically refers to the laws of nature, especially again the laws of nature concerning the nature of happiness, the nature of suffering, because that's the most important part, the thing for living beings. Everything in the every being has consciousness, and even a tiny ant, if it's crawling around the ground and you put your finger down in front of it, it'll stop because it senses some danger, and it'll go around or go back because it senses some danger. So that in something that tiny as a little ant, there's something very alive, something very conscious. And it's that search for happiness, the search to want to exist in a relatively state of comfort and to avoid pain. And that's the drive of every living being, even to the smallest little microbe the first cellular thing in the ocean. And it's also the whole process of evolution has arisen because of that. The need to protect oneself and to avoid danger, to avoid getting eaten, to protect oneself, to learn how to survive and produce and basically be happy. So that's the drive of all living beings, and it's been there since the dawn of evolution. But in spite of our wanting to live in comfort and happiness and free from pain, we always can't get that, right? There's a lot of things that block our suffering, whether it's physical suffering or mental suffering of various kinds. And so, the Buddha's focus was on that. He was very pragmatic and very much a realist. And just knowing how this world was created and so on might be intellectually stimulating, but it's not going to do the hungry person any good, or the person is suffering from depression or other mental problems. So the Buddha focused his Dharma teachings on in what he called the Four Noble Truths. So most of you probably have heard of these things before, but I'm just briefly reviewing it. In that, so we know that different levels of suffering exists in the world, and what is the causes of the suffering, or how does it continue? How do we keep propagating and regenerating the cycle of the suffering, and also how it can be brought to an end? Because with the Buddha's experience of awakening or enlightenment, he experienced that state in which suffering as an internal element has been brought, or could be brought to an end. And then the way to live, think, and meditate, which will allow for the gradual weakening and overcoming of those things within the mind that bring us repeated levels of suffering. So basically those Four Noble Truths. But I want to focus primarily now on those three levels of suffering. And first one is the obvious physical level of suffering. So we're all born, we have these bodies, and as you grow up, even babies are afflicted with diseases and deformities and kinds of problems that bring them self-suffering as well as to their family, and could last for a whole lifetime. And there's others who may not have such, but they're afflicted by different diseases and sicknesses or frequently through their life that cause problems. Or this body is subject to getting broken bones and other types of afflictions and pain, not having it the way we want. So, and a lot of these are the cause are generated by karma, and we might not know all those conditions, but even we incur physical sufferings to ourselves by being careless and unmindful. So we get in accidents and cut ourselves, injure ourselves because we're rushing here and there, not paying attention, or drink and get in a car, or cause this body untold problems, which then affect our mind, and the mind suffers. But anyway, so that level of gross suffering that's connected with the physical world, especially the body, and the heavy emotions such as grief, lamentation, pain, despair, depression that come about because of this impermanence of the material world. And then there's the mental suffering. In this, the Buddha explained as not getting what one wants and getting what one doesn't want. And that refers to the six senses of things that we have to see, hear, smell, taste, touch. We all have our likes and dislikes. Sometimes some things that we want to hear and see, taste, smell, touch, and other things that we don't want to hear, see, taste, smell, and touch, right? Like you don't want to see a smelly, decaying corpse laying at the edge of the road. But you like to see, beautiful, pleasant objects, nice flowers, so many other, types of things. So, but we can't have it all the time. And even though we strive to get pleasurable things, we can't always get them. So not getting what one wants. And so we worry and fret over that. And our world becomes dependent on that. People become overly dependent on the senses for their pleasure, or what they deem that is going to make them happy. And then, on the other extreme, there's the getting what you don't want, and the fear and worry about anticipating things that are going to happen to you that you don't like your in-laws coming to stay for 3 weeks with you. I mean, don't get me wrong, just a typical example, right? Or any number of other things. You're planning a vacation, to the Outer Banks, and a hurricane comes, or all kinds of impermanence due to weather, due to sickness, due to other people not acting the way that you want, and we have these aversions. We worry about it, right? People worry and scheme and anticipate, how am I going to get away from this? How am I going to prevent this? And they get locked into a kind of a mental prison. So this kind of thing is going on almost continuously, even on subtle levels. Like even the fact while you're meditating, if you have an itch, how many people rubbed or tried to scratch or get away from some kind of an itch or a minor ache or pain this morning? I saw some people move their arms. Okay, so even something that's subtle, that's getting away from what you don't want. You don't want this itch. But that creates a kind of a stress in the nervous system. It's resisting what is. Or you're sitting too long and you start to anticipate, when is the bell going to ring? And, worrying about that, and the mind creating these little problems out of basically very insignificant things. Anyway, so that's what we call the mental suffering. Just the dissatisfaction with what is, with impermanence. And it's based on impermanence, that everything in the world is changing. Beyond our control for the most part. Our body's changing, our loved ones are changing, the politicians are changing, the weather and everything, and we can't control it. You can see the state of the current election, right? Nobody likes it, we can't control it. It's kind of going under its own power. So anyway, that's the mental suffering. Basically, dissatisfaction with the present moment. Based on these factors of not getting what you want and getting what you don't want, it encourages all kinds of thoughts about the past, future, greed, hatred, delusion, anxiety, fear. And then there's the third level of suffering, which the Buddha defined as the 5 aggregates of clinging or suffering. After he defined the physical sufferings of birth, sickness, disease, broken bones, cancers, all these heavy sufferings, and then the mental one of not getting what you want, not getting what you don't want. He said, in short, these 5 aggregates of clinging are suffering. It's a little bit harder to understand. But basically it means the elements of our body and mind. That means the material, the body, but also the material world, then our feelings, perceptions, volitional activities of the mind, that means our desires and wants and emotions and reactions. And then even consciousness itself, the ego consciousness. the sense of the me, the I, or the doer. And we cling to these things as being I and me and mine, but we also cannot control them. And they bring us a lot of suffering. But I like to define that actually as spiritual suffering. Because a person might be fairly okay, maybe their physical life is fairly okay, like my mother's 98, she never had any really serious sicknesses, and just some arthritis maybe, and some, getting weak as she's getting old. But basically, not too much. And her mind also has been fairly stable and not too many problems, at least as far as I know. Okay, anyway, there's millions of people like that. But they may suffer from not knowing the truth. That means they may still suffer. Their ego feels like it's still a little me in the world is out there, even though they might believe in some God or some other kind of thing that's going to save them, but still the sense that they haven't merged into the totality of the whole, and there's still this nagging, kind of spiritual doubt, and so on. So that's what I call spiritual suffering. Being separated from the whole and still being caught in the web of I, me, and mine, and the potential for problems that brings. So, and so understanding all three of those levels is really the main focus of understanding the Dhamma, of cultivating what is called right understanding, and especially of meditation. And the essence of that is that really the Buddha discovered that happiness is already within ourselves. And everybody's trying to do things to be happy. But as evolution is developed, and especially in this modern day and age, the yardstick of happiness for most people is kind of considered something that you bring in from outside, bring into yourself. Whether it's bringing God into yourself, or having the best family and people that love you and obey you, and perfect husband, perfect wife, perfect kids, perfect job, or just also satisfying the senses, as we've already talked about. And especially with the modern commercialization, everything is ads are geared to make you believe that you can't live without this or that newest gadget and so on. And basically people have been brainwashed through that. And they become dependent on that. And so they're seeking happiness outside of themselves. And basically, in this sense of the ego, it keeps us separated from the whole. That also is something that we've created. And the fact that when you were a baby in the mother's womb, for 9 months, basically all your mind knew was the feeling of the energy, and that tremendous energy pouring through the body and nervous system, all those. You go from a one-celled organism to a multi-billion-celled organism in the space of 9 months. Right? So that's a tremendous energy. And basically it's just the present moment. It's that life force. And it's also conscious. From the Dhamma point of view, even that one cellular organism has a kind of consciousness. And it's that that drive to live. And so in that one-cell organism, that consciousness divided and went into every single cell. So basically every single cell of the body has a kind of consciousness. And they're all connected to what is called the internet of the body. And even sciences have proved this to us. The cells in your toe can communicate with the cells in the brain, and they're all connected and know what is happening. and all these marvelous systems in the body, circulation, respiration, immune system, all these things, they interconnect and they cooperate to keep the body going. And at the time of birth, when the baby comes out, what's one of the first things that happens? Right?
Yep.
The cord gets cut. So the baby loses that connection to life force. The baby loses that connection to the present moment. And then it's set adrift by itself. And then the parents give it a little name. Oh, little Johnny, little Susie. And the relatives come over and hold it. And Gucci, Gucci, goo. And then when you call it by its name, it looks. So what used to be what is termed oceanic awareness, because when the baby first comes out of the womb, it doesn't even have the idea of its mother, or even if it's separate from its mother's body, it might be sitting on her tummy, but has no idea that I have a separate body and that's my mother. None of these ideas are in the mind. But slowly they come as you give it language. That's daddy, that's mommy. And then feelings are there. You get a pleasant feeling from the touch of the mother or sucking the breast. You get a pleasant feeling. Or when the doctor whacked it on its butt, had a painful feeling. So it can still feel pleasure or pain, but it didn't even have the idea that I am feeling this. It was just a very, kind of spontaneous or knee-jerk type of reaction. But slowly, what used to be oceanic awareness gets coagulated because of all this attention that's being given to it. You're starting to think that, I'm somebody separate. And the nucleus, or what we call eye consciousness, starts to coagulate in the middle of what used to be oceanic awareness without any divisions and boundaries, likes or dislikes. It starts to coagulate. And then, of course, as we learn language and we start to memorize what is what, and we start to gain experiences, the cat comes by and scratches us, and all of a sudden we have a fear of cats because it causes us pain. So whatever causes a little pain, we start to dislike that. And whatever causes us some pleasurable feeling, we want that. And this slowly grows over time. And so we start to depend on all the relatives come over, start giving you gadgets and giving you things and sweets, and we gradually form these attachments and aversions. But this is a learned behavior. And as we grow on older, it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse, or deeper and deeper. And the further we look out and crave things of the future, the further we get away from our truth. That means the further we get away from ourselves, or our connection to the body, to the present moment. Again, the body simply is the only thing that's really an anchor to the present moment. Our nervous system is all tied up, and our consciousness is intimately tied up with that. And then the mind starts creating the past and future. The baby's consciousness has no idea of past or future. But when the grandparents come and give it some sweets, then they go away, then slowly, and then they come back a week later, and they give it, and then they start thinking, are they going to come again in the future? Or something about pain, they have the fear about coming back to the future. All this slowly is gradually accumulated over years, but it happens. And that's the truth. Nobody can deny that. Even child developmental psychologist doesn't take a Buddha to really understand that. But anyway, so the thing is that we've gotten further and further dependent on the external world for our happiness, and we've lost that natural connection to the present moment. which also is synonymous with happiness. Because again, all pains and problems and suffering comes from basically remembering the past, projecting the future, and dragging in all the anxieties and worries that come along with that. And so the practice of mindfulness, that's why the practice of mindfulness begins with learning how to get recentered and connected to the breathing body. Because again, the body is always in the present moment. And also we lost that natural wisdom. The body has its own natural wisdom. Look, from a one-cell organism, this body is, in 9 months, developed into a human organism, one of the most evolved, or at least what we think, most evolved in the universe. And it knows how to help itself. The immune system could heal itself, and other things. The body knows how to adapt and change to the changing situations. But we've interfered with it. We've interfered with the natural healing process of the body by the various pollutions that we've gotten, right? The pollution of the eating bad foods, even our thoughts, and so many other things. And basically being unmindful. The mind that's caught up in the future, it's always a jump ahead of itself. And it's not listening anymore to the needs of the body because it's become disconnected from it. So the body is trying to tell us things. Oh, don't do this. Don't. Like you learn to smoke when you're young. And then, before you know it, you at least, before the 1950s or so, and there's not much knowledge about the harmful effects of different things. People just did these things, and the body was trying to tell them things, like starting to cough up phlegm and so on. But the mind is kind of in denial because of its desire for this whatever kind of stimulation it is. And for example, if somebody starts to light up a cigarette and the body is subtly trying to tell them, don't do that, don't do that. Or even in their back of the mind, consciously they know they shouldn't do it, but their surface mind says, shut up. And in so many other ways. And then because the mind is a jump ahead of itself in the future, you're preparing lunch and cutting some potatoes or veggies, with a sharp knife, and thinking about your date on the weekend or whatever. Cut yourself, and then have to stop and bandage it up. And, or you're walking down the street, daydreaming about something, and bump into a tree, bump into somebody else, wander into the road, almost get hit by a bicycle or a car, because the mind was disconnected from the body and was a step ahead of itself, either in the past or running back to, either ahead of itself in the future or going to the past. So therefore the mind creates much of the problems for the body in that sense, by not being mindful, by not being grounded and connected to the present moment. Let alone all the other beneficial effects that can come out of meditation, but just the fact that a person can learn to be more centered and prevent these kind of unnecessary accidents and things that come when we're rushing too fast. Because we're rushing faster to get somewhere. So our mind is on the destination, not in the present moment of what we're actually doing. So even on that more or less mundane or physical level, the practice of mindfulness and learning to be more grounded and centered plays its important function. But basically this split between the body and mind. And so the first phase of mindfulness is to bring the mind back into the body. And these are the Buddhist teaching on the four foundations of mindfulness. The mindfulness of the body is the first sort of stage or first level of practice. And of course that includes the breathing, because the breathing is the most, along with the heart beating and the blood pulsing, and the breath is and those things are the most predominant and constant activity, of the body from the moment of birth until the moment you die. And so that's why it's the natural connection to learning how to stay centered in the body. So that's the first level in order to bring the mind back into the body and have that awareness. And by being more centered and grounded in the body, then you become more aware of the mind. And because the body is basically the outer shell of the mind. It's the home for our mind. You might live in a house somewhere, 2256 14th Street or wherever, but that's only where you entertain friends, produce babies, cook food, have parties, whatever. But that's not really where you live. You live right here within this 5 or 6 foot long body with its nervous system, sense organs, memory and consciousness. And that's even exactly what the Buddha, one of the most profound utterances of the Buddha, was that the world, the arising of the world, the ceasing of the world, and the path leading to the ceasing of the world is right within this fathom long, 5 or 6 foot long body, again with its nervous system, feelings, and consciousness and memory. And to the Buddha, that's the world. The world means the world, what we're conscious of. And also the world that's flowing through our senses at any one time. He wasn't as interested in the exact time creation of this physical earth. But that's the difference between, let's say, teachings of the Buddha and other teachings that are concerned with whether this world is eternal or not eternal, or how or when it was created, what minerals were created, was there going to be places to live on other planets once we destroy this one, can we go and destroy other ones, or whatever. But now if I, don't get me wrong, just trying to create a kind of a larger picture of what's going on, in general. How the world has got so turned upside down and why there's so much suffering in the world. So, even modern science, they're concerned with basically this material world. And they give lip service to the mind. And they might know a lot of things about the physical world and something about maybe psychology or how the brain works. But in terms of actually what is consciousness, how does ego consciousness arise? How does the different aspects about the deeper meaning of impermanence and really the more ultimate meaning of life? I mean, different religions, of course, have given their own spin on what the ultimate meaning of life or destination after death or whatever. But basically modern science haven't interested in about how this mind arose. And basically that's because of their being stuck in certain philosophical and religious beliefs even, and they stop being true scientists. In the Buddha's opinion, Western scientists are not true scientists at all, because they're not interested in the science of life. They're in the science of perpetuating wrong views and mediocre type of science, but not the ultimate science that's ultimately going to lead to, complete freedom and suffering. So, the Buddha was really one of the original scientists. So he was created interested in how the mind creates the world, not who created the world, how the mind creates the world. And there's an interesting little story. Some of you may have heard this before. How many have heard the Rohitissa Sutta? You know the story of Rohitissa. So Rohitissa was one of these celestial beings, like let's say an angel or in heaven, some heavenly being. And with their power, with one stride of their walking, they could cover 100 miles. And this one Rohitissa thought, I want to find the end of the world. And so he went walking and even running in different directions all over, the solar system or whatever, trying to find the end of the world. And he went to this religious person or saint and asked him, and he said, well, go ask the other guy. And so he kept going to all these self-proclaimed saints and other people asking for the end of the world. They'd all scratch their head and go ask somebody else. And then finally, somebody said, well, why don't you go ask Mahabrahma? He was like the creator god in those days. For Hindus, Mahabrahma was the one who sort of like created this physical earth out of dust or whatever and put everybody on it, sort of like the Christian idea, maybe a little bit different, but something like that. So anyway, they went and asked he went all the way to Mahabrahma Loka. And Mahabrahma was giving a talk to all the other lesser angels and beings there. And the Rohitissa went up and asked Mahabrahma, how do I reach the end of the world? And Mahabrahma said, shh, don't talk so loudly. I don't want my disciples to hear. I don't know. Go ask the Buddha. And so even Mahabrahma, who thought he created the world, couldn't answer the question, how did you reach the end of the world? And so finally, this Rohitissa went back to the Buddha, and that's when the Buddha told him, Rohitissa, my dear boy, you can never find the end of the world by running, by physically running. Nor can you reach the end of suffering without reaching the end of the world. And that's when he made this profound utterance of that the world, the arising of the world, the ceasing of the world, and the path leading to the ceasing of the world is right within this 5 or 6 foot long body, as I mentioned, with the nervous system, feelings, memory, and consciousness. So, that's what the Buddha was interested in, and that's the whole focus on the practice of Dhamma, is about trying to understand that. I mean, it's very profound on one sense, but when you actually experience it in deep meditation, it's the most natural and most wonderful thing you could ever imagine. But so that's why the emphasis on learning how to get reconnected to the body. We carry it around with us all the time, don't we? It weighs 50 kilos or 100 pounds, 120, 200 pounds or more of flesh and bones. I mean, we're carrying it around, like carrying the sacks of cement around. It's a heavy burden. And a lot of people abuse it and do things that cause it unnecessary suffering. So instead, we can use this body to a good use by learning to understand what it is and to appreciate it and know that it's a very valuable thing. This body is the gateway, is the gateway to liberation. And we need it in order to find happiness. At least in 99.9% of the cases, it's the only pathway to happiness. You have to reach the mind, you have to go through the body. And so we should use it in the best possible way as a foundation of awareness, as the anchor to the present moment. And so it's like climbing a mountain. You know, if somebody told you, oh, there's a treasure that's buried up on top of, let's say Stone Mountain in Georgia, that's the closest one I can think of. Or whatever, maybe taller one. Then, you know, if you want to get that treasure, what's the first thing you have to do? You have to get to the base of the mountain first, right? And then you have to slowly walk up to the top. But in this case, if we're trying to find the source of happiness, which is already within sight of ourselves, first we have to find the base of the mountain, which is your buttocks pressing the ground, or your feet pressing the ground if you're standing. That's the base of the mountain. And then instead of climbing up the mountain, so to speak, we go inside the mountain, through the various levels of our mind, until we reach the source of consciousness itself. And so that is what these aggregates are, actually. These 5 aggregates that the Buddha said in short, the 5 aggregates of clinging, suffering. That's because we cling to them as being I, me, and mine. But they're always changing, because they're being driven by the past laws of conditioning and the law of karma and the law of conditioning. That everything is basically just habits. So the body is the outer shell. And then just inside of that, once we get under the skin, then you come to the level of sensations. That means you feel the various sensations on the body, and even sounds are going through the ear. They're creating electromagnetic waves in the nervous system that are felt as sensations going towards the brain, where they're then recognized and then reacted to. But all these sensations, so the purpose of getting centered in the body is to get you closer to where the mind is operating from the source of the mind. So how many of you got lost in your thoughts this morning? Did you ever ask yourself why? Why do you get lost in your thoughts? You ever thought about it?
All the time.
You ever come up with an answer?
It's just a habit. It's a habit.
Yeah, of course, you could mention a number of things, but the bottom line is you didn't see them coming, right? You were sitting there trying to count your breaths, or just to keep remembering, breathing in, sitting, breathing out, sitting, in, sitting. But before you know it, like a clever thief, you didn't even see them coming, but before you know it, you caught yourself lost in some thoughts. How many people even kind of said, oh my God, oh shit, when they realized they were lost in thoughts? Be honest. So it caught you by surprise, because you didn't see them coming. Because the mind is not deeply connected to the nervous system. or it was lost in its thoughts, or it was half asleep. So you didn't see them coming. And that's because you weren't connected and you weren't grounded and centered in the body. Because thoughts are arising from the cellular level, really. Even thoughts are basically kind of electromagnetic, or just electrons flowing on the wave of ether, you might say, and creating, thought vibrations and memories. So we don't see them coming because our mind again is either connected in the external world or just on the surface of your body. So they sneak in. And the body is the easiest thing to notice. Again, because I mentioned we're carrying around with us all the time. It weighs 100 and more pounds. And it's in your face. If you know how to feel it. And it's not far away. And so just a matter of fact of just reminding, oh yes, sitting, immediately you feel the buttocks pressing the ground, with the feet or other body sensations. And so that's why actually mindfulness basically means to remember. But remember the present moment. And especially remembering the body, because that's the easiest thing to remember and feel. So you keep reminding yourself, what is this body doing right now? Even just the gross physical outer body. And it's sitting, it's standing, it's walking, it's lifting your arm, it's turning your head, or it's laying down, or whatever posture or movement you're doing is simply the ability to remember. What's so difficult about that? Is it really rocket science? Why do we make the world so difficult? Our mind has made it difficult. Not meditation is difficult. You've made the mind more difficult. Meditation is the most simplest and easiest and naturalist thing in the universe because that is the natural state of the pure mind. But we've become unnatural because of our not knowing the truth. And no one bothered to tell us. That's what's the shame, the tragedy. All these young kids are being brought up, learning all these bad habits. Whether it's from their parents or their family members or the neighborhoods they live in or the TV or whatever. And even the parents don't bother telling the kids because the parents don't know also. For the most part. Not from the Dhamma point of view. So no one's bothered, and the scientists won't even tell us because they don't even know. Or the doctors. Even the medical profession, there's a conspiracy against learning the truth about the natural health of the body. Drug companies and even doctors, they don't even tell us how to breathe properly. You would think, right? They just give us pills. Oh, take this pill, do this, and hope it'll get better. But ultimately, for most people, it doesn't get better. It adds a lot of complications. So anyway, I don't like to belabor the point, but this is all an aspect of trying to cultivate kind of the right attitude or understanding of what it is that we're sort of up against in terms of trying to learn how to control our thoughts and to develop mindfulness and concentration and wisdom. But basically to get reconnected to the present moment, because that's where you start developing wisdom. So there's three spiritual faculties or higher mental powers, which are called mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. Now, there's a little formula. Mindfulness plus concentration equals wisdom. And they're usually mentioned in that order because that's the order that they are gradually cultivated, their natural state of emergence. And first you have to become mindful. That means kind of alert to the present moment. When people talk about concentration, there's a big talk in different meditation circles about people say, I just practice concentration, all wisdom comes out of concentration. Others say, I just practice mindfulness, we don't need to develop concentration. So they try to make it look like they're separate things. But actually they're not separate things. And it's like there's no such thing as concentration, ultimately. There's only mindfulness. There's only awareness. But when mindfulness is focused on one object, we say we become concentrated. But it's mindfulness. It's unbroken mindfulness. It's still mindfulness. So actually, concentration, the idea of concentration alone is a misnomer. But it's mindfulness that's focused on one object. But it's still mindfulness. But there's different ways you can practice it. So the common idea that you place your attention at the tip of the nose or on one particular object and you try to keep remembering that and focusing on that. So you're mindful of that one object. And when the distractions cease, or you stop being distracted by the hindrances, then the mind can enter a state of, kind of feeling of being at one with that object. And of course all these blissful feelings of happiness and contentment and inner light, or so many nice sensations can arise through that kind of concentration. But you become basically oblivious to the world around you. And so that's not necessarily a useful state for the average person, because we have to come back to the world and move in the world most of the time. So the other way of practice is you develop mindfulness of breathing, but you don't exclusively stick only with the breathing. You use breathing as a kind of a tethering post. It's there, but at the same time the mind is open enough to feel a scratch, but to kind of let it go, and or you might feel some different sensations or hear sounds, and so you develop this balance of mindfulness and concentration, as I already was mentioning. So real meditation is the balance between being mindful or alert, and at the same time being concentrated and kind of anchored in the body. It's sort of like a leash on the dog. So you have an untrained dog. You get a dog from the pound or something. And then he wants to run after people and bite people and run to the garbage cans and go molest other doggies and so on. So you have to put him on a leash. And here in the cities they require you to put the dog on a leash, right? Why is that? Because he'll chase some other dogs, right? Or go bite somebody or slobber on somebody's nice new clothing and wind up getting in a fist fight. Or worse, they got a gun and shoot the dog. So you got to put a leash on the dog. Why? Because the dog don't know how to control itself, right? It's following its instincts. So the same way with the mind of most people. Most people don't know how to control their thoughts, and they're following their habits. They see something out of desire that they want, and they go try to, molest it or whatever. Or sticking their nose in where it don't belong and wind up getting bit. Because they don't know how to control their passions. They don't know how to control their lust or their desire. It wanders in wrong places. Or doesn't know how to control their anger. And it erupts in fits of rage and so on that hurts so many people. Or it's caught in itself and it goes into deep despair or depression. because it doesn't know how to, control itself. So that's why we need to tie it to a post. So you put the dog on a leash, you tie the leash or rope to a post, and the dog may run after somebody to try to bite them, but it reaches the end of the leash and gets stopped. So by developing the leash of the body, or the breathing body, the actual physical body itself is even better than the breath, because you can't always be aware of the breath, but you can almost any time really feel the body if you really want to. And so when even just part of your attention is connected to the body, the mind may start to go out, but it kind of at some point, because even if just 10% or 20% of your attention is feeling something on the body, it'll catch itself before it actually has bitten somebody. It'll catch itself. Say, stop. It'll back off. And so at least it will prevent you from doing something that will, harm yourself or others, hopefully. Anyway, that's a training that's gradually done. So that is why, really, on the practical and beginning level, mindfulness of the body acts as that leash for our uncontrolled mind. Now, once the mind gets more tame and gets more controlled by developing concentration and by learning how to develop this kind of natural detachment and restraint from things, you don't have to put it on a leash anymore. A well-trained dog, if it's really well-trained, if you get that dog whisperer guy to come over to your house and train your dog, then maybe you don't have to keep it on a leash. But until that time, the body acts as the leash. In the same way as I mentioned, the anchor of a ship. So it's the same kind of deal. So in the simile of the anchor of the ship, the anchor that's embedded in the bottom of the ocean floor, that's like our body. The ocean floor is like our body, the base of the world, right? So this body is the base of the mental world. And the ship is our mind. And when the storm comes up, the ship without an anchor, if it's sitting in the harbor without an anchor, what happens? The ships will collide into each other, or it may, as you saw in these recent hurricanes, a ship goes and crashes up on the shore. Or there's yachts or whatever, any kind of a boat, capsize and sink, or crash into others. And that's what we do with our mind. We crash into other people, get in fights, disputes, and other problems. Because of this not having an anchor to our passion and our impulses. And the chain is what? Come on, I've been talking about it already.
Mindfulness.
Right. The chain is the mindfulness. So the chain or the rope is what one end is connected to our mind, and the other one is connected to the body. And so it's like the game of tetherball. How many played the game of tetherball in elementary school? It was one of the favorite games back in those days before we had cell phones and all these other distractions. So the pole, the chain is attached to the pole, and the ball is like the mind. So you hit the ball and it goes around the post, right? But at least it stays, near the post. But what happens when you hit the ball and all of a sudden the chain snaps and the ball runs out into the street and a car runs over it, or a dog comes and picks it up and carries it away, or worse yet, it goes to their neighbor's window and breaks their front picture window. The problem. So like that, the These are useful images to kind of keep in mind from time to time. And so that's why we use the breathing body, sort of like that tethering post. And so when an object hits the ball, that means when a loud sound, disturbs the mind and, disturbs us, it's like the ball getting hit. And then if we chase that sound and start getting lost in thoughts about it, who made it, why don't they stop doing that, and all kinds of things, then that's like the ball crashing through a mirror. Or getting stolen by a dog, keep running down the road. Or getting lost even in our own thought, catching on to some memory, either a plan of the future or some thought of the past, and again, taking you away from the post, from the present moment. And that's what then drags in the past, futures, worries, anxieties, and fears. And that's what we get lost into. So that's why mindfulness of the body is emphasized so much. Because it's always with us, and it's the easiest thing to notice. But still it's not that easy because the habit of the mind. But it's really the ground zero where everything else starts from. And so, whenever you're meditating and you catch yourself lost in some distraction, whether it's a thought or it's distracted by a pain, or chasing a sound, then we have to be alert to that and to recognize that's the mindfulness. It recognizes when the mind is getting distracted. But when you notice the mind getting distracted, then the first thing, or whenever you've gotten lost from the present moment, is that, find wherever the body is contacting the ground. Just feel your butt grounded to the floor. That brings you right back to the present moment. Or any other touch sensations. So there's a number of touch sensations that are also useful to practice with. Because at any one time we don't know how our mind may respond, or what is the best thing to keep the mind kind of connected. Or if you can't feel the breathing so easy, you can select 4 or 5 prominent body sensations. So when you're sitting, there's always the sensation of your buttocks pressing the floor. You used to feel that solid contact. The little sensations you might feel there, the heat or just the pressure and so on. Maybe even you can feel the pulse of the blood and the capillaries and so on. And largely it's quite a pleasant feeling. Or the feeling of your legs crossed on the knee and the toes, where they touch each other, where they touch the floor. Or the hands touch, touching like this, or if they're like this. Those are very prominent, and most of them are quite neutral, even pleasing sensations, unless there's some pain there. So you can just focus on those items. But that's the present moment. Or again, the feeling of the head. Different sensations in the head are also very good to hold your attention. With the feeling of your eyes just resting in the sockets. It's a very nice feeling. Or any other sensations on the face. Something that gets your mind interest. The reason why we can't concentrate is our body is not a pleasant place to be for most people. Either it's very stiff and they have a lot of pain, or their breath is very shallow and their life force is just half kind of functioning. And so a lot of people say, "Oh, I can't feel anything." To me that's like, wow, really? To me I can feel at any one moment virtually hundreds, if not thousands of sensations all over the body, but in very subtle, almost like you're sitting on a mild vibrating machine. Because that's what the body is. But anyway, so you know, once you are able to, you know, get in touch with that, it becomes a very pleasant place to hang out. Or that's why we also do yoga exercises before sitting in meditation sometimes, to get the sensations in the body more active, and to kind of get more, you know, feeling those subtler sensations like the pulse of blood, or the body heat, or little prickling sensations, tingling sensations, or even minor aches and pains can be observed quite with a kind of even a neutral reaction, something to keep your interest. So there's some feeling there. But if your body is half dead, then you want to think about somebody else's body, don't you? It's more interesting. But actually our body is much more interesting than another person's body. Because that body you can't control. Maybe for 10 minutes, and then it's boom, hatred. But your own body is always there. And you can get intimate with it. Not in a narcissistic way, but I mean you're actually feeling the blood pulsing through the veins and the arteries, and the subtle, you know, sense. There's a whole treasure trove of pleasant sensations there, and because it's occurring in the present moment, your mind isn't obsessed with outer things. So it's just a matter of awakening that. It's called awakening the connection to the body, or what I call tuning in to the body. It's like tuning a radio dial, you know, onto a certain frequency. So that frequency is sitting, just feeling these different sensations. You know, the breath isn't even necessary. Once you can actually feel different sensations, you know, you're there already. The present moment is really the goal of our concentration and awareness. Specific things like the breathing or other sensations are just training devices. But once we learn to rest the mind in the present moment, it becomes concentrated. You know, there's a difference between concentrating and being concentrated. So we use an object to get concentrated because we're not concentrated. So we use an object such as the breathing or sitting, breathing, whatever, for a mindfulness. But once the mind becomes focused and is aware of just the general, is able to just rest in the middle of all these different kind of life force sensations and kind of find that present moment, that is the state of being concentrated. And the objects actually are not important anymore. The mind is resting in the present moment. That's the concentrated state. But anyway, that is sort of what we call the first real stage of meditation, is learning how to kind of come to that area, if not fully, but at least to get a sense of that and to get more of a taste of that and kind of know where it is. Once you recognize or learn to know where it is, then almost immediately you're able to just sit down and the mind will come back to that state, because again it's ground zero of awareness. So all the other things that we do are simply skillful means and ways of learning to gradually cultivate that. So we practice mindfulness, we practice concentration, and we need to. Just like that leash on the dog. But anyway, so that's why I want to encourage you with, and just working with that basic practice of just whenever you're distracted by anything, just remind yourself, well, what's the body doing right now? Yes, it's sitting, standing, walking, doing some movement. and learning how to, and also learning how to do deep, slow breathing is a very beneficial and useful tool in our strategy to outwit Mara and to outwit our conditioning. There's lots of kind of basic strategies or tools that we use in overcoming our conditioning. And deep, slow breathing is one of them. And especially because I was trained in yoga, when I first started meditating in India, I also started to practice yoga because people were saying, yeah, the yoga is good and helps you to meditate. So I did that, and that, it does. But deep, slow breathing is one of the most beneficial things that I learned. So normally when teachers teach you meditation, they say, don't control the breath, don't control the breath. Now that would be all right if our breath was purified in the first place. But our breath has become unnatural. We've lost natural breathing because of our emotions and because of our jump to the future and our fast way of moving. Our breath has become short and shallow. And that's taxing on the nervous system. And so if we learn to develop more deep, slow breathing, taking a few seconds to breathe in and even hold the air in the lungs a couple of seconds so the oxygen in the lungs has enough time to really transfer to all the blood cells, and it carries it out to the body in this kind of rhythmic, what's called rhythmic breathing. Take like this in-breath, taking 3 or 4 seconds to breathe in, holding the breath in for 2 seconds, and taking 3 or 4 seconds to breathe out with a brief pause. And you feel this undulating, expanding and contracting of the breathing inside, like sending soothing and relaxing currents of energy through the nervous system, relaxing the body and the mind. And it also takes more effort to do that, so that's the effort that will help you to stay concentrated. If you just try to watch the subtle, short little breaths, because they're not very strong, it's not enough to hold your mind. It gets easily distracted. But if you learn to deliberately cultivate deep, slow breathing until it becomes more of a kind of a habit, then that becomes a more natural breath. So that's why I actually encourage people to use that. So although you don't want to try to breathe that way all the time, and you don't want to strain at the breathing. So, but that's why when you first start your sitting period, to start with several rounds of that kind of breathing. And then when you get kind of tired of that, naturally you get tired of it, you let it go. But then the residue of that will stay in your mind longer. And the breath may continue to go like that a couple of times. Eventually it will go back to its normal state. But any time after that, if you have more thoughts or distractions, come back and do it again. Even just for a few times. And then let it go. So like that, there's a way of doing it for a few minutes at a time, then then just going into more, see if you can follow it without that. But then when you're getting more distracted, you come back and do it again. So you could spend the whole meditation period just working on it. And gradually you come to a point where you can do that kind of breathing in for longer periods of time without hardly any effort. And the mind becomes very, very concentrated. And it puts you basically in that beginning level of samadhi and so on. So anyway, that's why I recommend people to work on that, because it's really the most valuable thing that I learned in all of my practices of yoga, more than standing on your head or bending your body like a pretzel, is learning these ABCs of breathing. And it's a crying shame that doctors don't even tell us about this kind of breathing. But now they are. How many people have read recently articles on your cell phone that pop up, or other kind of health programs, that even doctors now are admitting and telling people that deep, slow breathing is the key to life. And my yoga teacher used to say a nice little thing. He said, when you're born with a finite number of breaths that you'll take. So if you breathe more quickly, you're going to die younger. If you breathe slower, you'll live longer. And in a way, if we look in the animal world, we'll see that's true. Animals that breathe really fast, they have a very short lifespan. You know, even somebody like a dog is only 17 years. Elephants, they live 100 years. Other animals that breathe very slowly, they live for a longer time. So we can extrapolate that back to ourselves. Also. Anyway, these are just things. I'm throwing some of these things out there so that to encourage you to experiment with especially that kind of a thing and see if it's useful in order to learn how to more comfortably get into a state of concentration and awareness without fighting and struggling so much with the various hindrances. And learning to take deep breaths forces you to sit straight, because you can't take a deep, slow breath while sitting slouched over. So in that way it does several things at the same time. It helps you to sit more straight, and also it helps to feel a more dynamic breath, which is more a pleasing sensation that helps the mind want to stay more focused. And it also the physiological benefits of the oxygenated blood being able to reach the further regions of the body. Okay? How many people don't know the meaning of sadhu?
I think most of them know.
Basically, it's an expression. Whenever we see something or hear something that's auspicious, something that's not of the ordinary, something that can help lift our attention or mind upwards toward a, non-mature, mundane things, or something of a, let's say, a spiritual nature. It's something very rare to hear these days, and so it's an exclamation of appreciation of something that you think it's worth seeing or hearing or something like that. But usually after Dhamma talks, it's the way people kind of just express the whatever. Anyway, okay, so now we're going to slowly, mindfully stand up and do a standing meditation before sitting again.